Paul Newman seemed too composed and too kind to ever hold a grudge, but he did. Before his death, he wrote a secret list of 7 actors he couldn't stand. A list so blunt it was kept quiet for years. Thanks to newly uncovered interviews, the names and Newman's reasons are finally coming to light. Today, we reveal the 7 stars who pushed Hollywood's most respected gentleman to his breaking point. At number 7 on Paul Newman's list was a name almost no one expected: Tom Cruise. Their collaboration on The Color of Money should have been a perfect pairing. The seasoned legend passing the torch to Hollywood's newest rising star? And in many ways, it was. But behind the scenes, Newman found Cruise far more draining than inspiring. Not because of talent or work ethic, Cruise had plenty of both, but because of the relentless intensity that followed him like a spotlight. To Newman, acting was a craft done quietly with focus, discipline, and as little ego as possible. Cruise, meanwhile, arrived on set like a controlled explosion. He sprinted between takes, peppered Newman with questions, and praised him so aggressively that it felt less like respect and more like worship. Newman didn't dislike compliments, but he hated anything that made the work feel performative. And with Cruise, everything was loud, enthusiastic, and dialed to 11. What truly irritated Newman wasn't the on-set behavior. It was the press tour afterward. Newman preferred letting the film speak for itself, but Cruise was already becoming a master of the publicity machine. During interviews, he'd interrupt Newman mid-sentence to hype the movie, talk about his training regimen, or share how life-changing working with Newman had been. It wasn't malicious, just youthful overexcitement. But to Newman, it felt like noise drowning out the art. Martin Scorsese later recalled Newman leaning toward him after one junket and whispering, "If that kid tells the world how much he learned from me one more time while talking over me, I'm going to toss him out a window." It was said with a smirk, but everyone knew the frustration behind it was real. Still, Newman remained diplomatic. When asked publicly about Cruise, he kept it classy. He's a very dedicated young man with abundant energy. Translation: the kid was talented, but exhausting. And while Cruise may have irritated him, he wasn't the one who pushed Newman's patience into truly uncomfortable territory. Because the next name on the list wasn't a clash of personalities, it was a clash of values. The 6th name on Paul Newman's list wasn't about a bad performance, an on-set clash, or a bruised ego. It was something deeper, a divide so fundamental that Newman never got past it. That name was Charlton Heston. And unlike the others on the list, Newman never even worked with him. Their conflict lived entirely in the space where politics, responsibility, and public influence collided. To Newman, Heston represented a version of Hollywood he couldn't respect. As Newman became increasingly vocal about civil rights, anti-war efforts, and progressive causes in the 1960s and 70s, Heston moved in the opposite direction. He embraced conservative activism, became a key figure in the National Rifle Association, and delivered speeches Newman found reckless and inflammatory. Newman didn't mind political differences. He had friends across the ideological spectrum, but he believed public figures carried a responsibility that Heston had abandoned. Newman's widow, Joanne Woodward, later explained it plainly. Paul couldn't reconcile the Moses he saw on screen with the man he saw behind a podium. Heston wasn't just supporting different policies, he was championing them with an intensity Newman felt ignored the real consequences they had on ordinary people. The tension between them became unmistakable during the 1966 political season. Newman, supporting anti-Vietnam War candidate Eugene McCarthy, walked into a restaurant and found himself seated near Heston, who was campaigning for the pro-war side. According to those who were there, Newman refused even to look in Heston's direction. And that wasn't petty silence. That was Newman drawing a line. Robert Vaughn, who knew them both, said, Newman believed that actors had a duty to use their fame thoughtfully. Heston's speeches, especially those surrounding gun culture, struck Newman as irresponsible and dangerously influential, and Newman didn't hide it. In a 1978 interview, he said, "Some people confuse having played great men with being great men. I find that problematic." Everyone understood who he meant. Their divide wasn't personal. It was philosophical. Heston saw activism as a weapon. Newman saw it as a responsibility. And between those two visions, compromise was impossible. But if Heston irritated Newman on a moral level, the next name on the list irritated him professionally, and almost immediately. Number 5 on Paul Newman's list was a man whose talent was undeniable, whose legacy was massive, and whose work habits drove Newman absolutely crazy. Frank Sinatra. Their time together on the 1980 disaster film, When Time Ran Out, is remembered for one thing: how fast Newman realized he and Sinatra lived on completely opposite planets when it came to professionalism. Newman approached every role the same way: prepared, disciplined, early to set, and fully immersed in the craft. Sinatra? He played by a different rule book, one where the script was optional, punctuality was flexible, and effort was negotiable. Sinatra was a superstar, and he behaved like one. He'd stroll onto set, glance at the lines for the day, give 1 or 2 takes, and then disappear. No rehearsal, no preparation, no staying longer than necessary. For Newman, who believed every minute on a film set mattered, it wasn't just frustrating, it was insulting. James Goldstone, a director who worked with both men, later said Newman viewed Sinatra's lack of effort as a slap in the face to everyone trying to make the film good. Newman wasn't asking Sinatra to be a method actor, just to show up with respect for the work. But Sinatra treated the production like a minor appointment, squeezed between concerts and cocktail hours. The result was immediate friction. According to co-star William Holden, the breaking point came when Sinatra delayed the entire production by nearly 3 hours, arriving late without explanation. Newman never yelled, he didn't need to. Instead, he delivered a quiet, controlled dressing down that left the set frozen. "Your behavior is disrespectful to everyone who's been waiting," he told Sinatra. Holden said Frank didn't take it well, and from that moment on, the two barely spoke. Years later, Newman was asked about Sinatra in an interview and responded with the kind of diplomacy that hid more than it revealed. "Frank has a lovely singing voice." It was the politest way Newman could say, "Great singer, terrible coworker." To Newman, Sinatra symbolized the one thing he despised most in Hollywood: believing talent excused everything. Newman worked too hard to tolerate that mindset. And while his clash with Sinatra was rooted in work ethic, the next name on his list struck an even sharper nerve. Because this time it wasn't laziness, it was wasted greatness. The 4th name on Paul Newman's private list stunned almost everyone who knew him: Marlon Brando. Newman never worked with Brando directly, but their careers ran side by side, intertwined in ways that bred both admiration and deep frustration. Early on, Hollywood constantly compared them, Newman as the next Brando, the new golden hope of the actor's studio. It was a comparison neither man liked, but for Newman, the real issue grew into something far more personal. Newman admired brilliance. He respected craftsmanship. He believed in showing up prepared, ready, and committed. And Brando, especially in his early years, embodied all of that. But as time passed, Brando drifted away from that discipline. He began relying on cue cards instead of memorizing lines. He grew indifferent to directors. He coasted on instinct and charisma instead of preparation. And to Newman, watching Brando let his gift erode was nothing short of heartbreaking. Robert Redford, one of Newman's closest friends, remembered Newman describing it with a metaphor as sharp as it was painful. Watching Brando in his later years, he said, was like watching someone burn a Picasso for heat. Brando wasn't just wasting talent, he was destroying something priceless. And for a man like Newman, who treated acting like a responsibility, not a hobby, that was unforgivable. Eva Marie Saint, who worked with Newman, said he genuinely believed actors owed their best to everyone on the set. Brando's shortcuts, late arrivals, and lack of effort felt like an insult to that belief. Even when Brando delivered brilliant performances, Newman couldn't get past the idea that he could have been even greater if he had simply cared as much as he once did. Brando's behavior became a cautionary tale for Newman, a reminder of what he never wanted to become. In one of his final interviews, Newman said, "Great talent comes with great responsibility. Not everyone understands that." He didn't mention Brando by name. He didn't need to. Where Sinatra irritated Newman with laziness, Brando frustrated him with wasted genius. But the next name on the list brought something different entirely. Not wasted talent, but a rivalry so intense it followed them all the way to the top of the marquee. The 3rd name on Paul Newman's list was one of the biggest surprises: Steve McQueen. To the public, they were two sides of the same coin, the cool, blue-eyed kings of 1960s masculinity. Fans loved comparing them, studios loved pairing them. And when they finally shared the screen in the towering inferno, it felt like Hollywood had given the audience the ultimate dream matchup. But off camera, it was anything but smooth. Their clash began before a single frame was shot. McQueen, fiercely competitive and obsessed with status, walked into negotiations like the film was a boxing match. He demanded equal pay with Newman, the same number of lines and even the same number of steps to climb in the burning skyscraper sequence. Every tiny detail became a battlefield. Most famously, McQueen insisted that his name not appear below Newman's in the opening credits. The compromise? A bizarre, slanted arrangement where McQueen's name came first, but Newman's was positioned higher, Hollywood's symmetry to appease egos. John Guillermin, the film's director, remembered how exhausting it became. He said Newman approached movies like a collaboration, while McQueen treated them like competitions. Newman believed the story should come first. McQueen believed he should. And when the two philosophies collided, sparks flew. On set, their differences grew even sharper. Newman prepared meticulously, working through scenes with focus and calm professionalism. McQueen, meanwhile, studied Newman's screen time the way an athlete studies a rival. He counted close-ups. He analyzed who had the better dramatic beats. He made sure he never appeared overshadowed. According to crew members, it wasn't unusual for McQueen to quietly lobby for script tweaks that made his character look tougher, smarter, or more heroic. Faye Dunaway, who worked with both men, though not together, summed it up best. Paul treated acting like a craft. Steve treated it like a war. They respected each other's talent, but their personalities were oil and water from the very beginning. Newman himself never trashed McQueen publicly. That wasn't his style. But he did once say, "Some actors see every film as a competition. I always saw it as a collaboration." Everyone who knew the story understood exactly who he meant. If McQueen pushed Newman's patience through rivalry, the next actor on the list pushed him through something even heavier. An ideological clash that cut straight to Newman's core beliefs. The second name on Paul Newman's list wasn't surprising to the people who knew him best. But it remains one of the most fascinating clashes in Hollywood history. John Wayne. Their conflict was never about personal insults or professional jealousy. It was about something far more volatile: ideology, patriotism, and the responsibility that came with being one of the most recognized actors in America. Newman and Wayne lived on opposite ends of the political spectrum. Newman spent much of his life supporting civil rights, promoting equality, and speaking against the Vietnam War. He used his fame to push for reform, believing actors had a moral obligation to use their influence carefully. Wayne, meanwhile, became the unofficial face of conservative Hollywood, pro-war, pro-establishment, and fiercely outspoken about what he believed it meant to be an American. He viewed anti-war activists like Newman as misguided at best and unpatriotic at worst. Their tension came to a boil during the height of the Vietnam conflict. Wayne aggressively defended the war, even starring in The Green Berets, a film Newman privately considered irresponsible propaganda. Newman was furious that one of Hollywood's biggest stars was glorifying a conflict that was taking thousands of young American lives. To him, Wayne wasn't just wrong. He was dangerous. And that disagreement wasn't theoretical. It became personal. Arthur Penn, a filmmaker and close friend of Newman, recalled that Newman never forgave Wayne for dismissing the anti-war movement as un-American, and the feeling was mutual. Wayne once labeled anti-war Hollywood figures soft, a category Newman fell directly into. Their public cordiality masked a very real and very deep divide, but politics weren't the only issue. Newman also bristled at what he perceived as Wayne's limited approach to acting. In a rare, unguarded moment, Newman told film critic Rex Reed, "John Wayne plays John Wayne in every movie. I've always tried to play someone different each time." Coming from Newman, who reinvented himself with almost every role, this wasn't just criticism. It was a statement of values, art versus formula, evolution versus certainty. When Wayne won the Oscar for True Grit in 1970, an award Newman had repeatedly been denied, Newman was publicly gracious but privately frustrated. To him, Wayne was being celebrated for doing the same thing he always did, while actors who pushed themselves creatively were overlooked. Still, Newman was never petty. After Wayne's death in 1979, he softened, acknowledging Wayne's cultural impact with surprising respect. We disagreed on practically everything, but you can't deny he was an American institution. The differences were real, but so was Newman's ability to separate the man from the legacy. But while Wayne represented a philosophical opponent, the #1 actor on Newman's list was something much more intimate. A friend he loved, a collaborator he trusted, and the one person who challenged his patience more than anyone else. The #1 spot on Paul Newman's list shocked everyone. Not because the name was controversial, but because it belonged to the person he was closest to, Robert Redford. Their on-screen chemistry was legendary, their friendship beloved by fans, and their collaborations, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, The Sting, are still considered some of the greatest pairings in Hollywood history. But for Newman, working with Redford came with a challenge he never fully solved: patience. Newman was famously punctual, disciplined, and laser-focused whenever he stepped onto a film set. Redford, on the other hand, he lived in a completely different relationship with time. To him, schedules were flexible, call times were suggestions, and arriving late wasn't disrespect. It was just Redford being Redford. This difference in rhythms created a tension that everyone on set noticed, even if Newman rarely voiced it. Director George Roy Hill, who worked with both men on their biggest films, once explained it perfectly. Paul was military in his punctuality. Redford existed in his own temporal universe. Newman would show up prepared at sunrise, ready to rehearse and shoot. Then he'd wait, and wait, and wait. Sometimes minutes, sometimes hours. And while Newman never exploded or complained, the frustration built up quietly. The crew even turned Redford's tardiness into a joke. During the sting, they presented Newman with a custom clock where every number on the dial had been replaced with Redford's name, meaning it was always Redford o'clock. Newman laughed, but the message hit home. Everyone knew who they were waiting for. What irritated Newman wasn't just the lateness, it was the contradiction. Redford could arrive 3 hours behind schedule, step in front of the camera cold, and deliver a flawless take on the first try. While Newman never begrudged Redford's talent, he found the casual brilliance infuriating. As he once grumbled privately to Director Hill, "The worst thing about this kid is that he can show up 3 hours late and still be better in one take than most actors are after a week. It's maddening." Despite the irritation, Redford was also Newman's greatest collaborator. The actor who pushed him, complimented him, and brought out his best. Their differences created a magnetic on-screen tension that audiences adored. And as they aged, the annoyance became something they could joke about. Redford himself later admitted, "Paul and I were opposite in so many ways. He was organized, I was chaotic. He was always on time, I was always late. Maybe that's why we worked." Newman, in his wonderfully dry sense of humor, summed it up even better during an AFI tribute. "Working with Robert Redford taught me patience. I had none before. I needed all of it with him." That line said everything. Redford frustrated him more than anyone else, yet their friendship remained one of the most important relationships of his life. But Newman's list didn't simply expose personal annoyances. It revealed the code he lived by, a set of standards that shaped every role, every collaboration, and every judgment he made behind the scenes. Paul Newman's secret list wasn't just a collection of grudges. It wasn't a tally of feuds or petty complaints. It was a window into the values that defined him, the standards he held himself to, and the expectations he believed every actor should honor. When the list finally surfaced through interviews and biography research years after his death, it didn't expose a bitter man. It exposed a principled one. Newman approached acting as both a craft and a responsibility. To him, being successful in Hollywood wasn't a license to behave however you wanted. It was a duty to treat the work, the cast, and the crew with respect. And what bothered him most wasn't talent or reputation, but how people use those things. Every actor on the list represented something Newman couldn't tolerate: ego overshadowing discipline, politics overshadowing compassion, or potential wasted by carelessness. Tom Cruise symbolized youthful intensity without restraint. Charlton Heston represented the misuse of influence. Frank Sinatra embodied the attitude that talent excused laziness. Marlon Brando showed how brilliance could rot when neglected. Steve McQueen turned filmmaking into a competition instead of a collaboration. John Wayne's public stance on patriotism clashed with Newman's belief in moral responsibility. And Robert Redford, ironically his closest friend, reminded Newman how much professionalism mattered to him, even in the face of irresistible talent. According to his daughter, Melissa Newman, the list wasn't meant to judge or condemn. It was Newman, holding himself accountable to his own beliefs. She said her father believed every actor owed their best to the audience and to the countless people behind the camera who made a movie possible. Falling short didn't make someone his enemy. It made them a reminder of what he never wanted to become. As Newman's cancer progressed in the early 2000s, he became more reflective and more honest with himself. Friends recalled that he began speaking more openly about the relationships that disappointed him and the lessons he drew from them. The list was part of that process, a kind of emotional inventory. What's even more telling is how Newman separated personal frustration from professional conduct. He never sabotaged anyone's career. He never brought his private feelings onto the set. Directors who worked with him said he treated everyone with equal respect. Whether they were his favorite co-star or the actor who tested his patience most, that quiet discipline became part of his legacy. Martin Scorsese later said Newman's list wasn't gossip. It was a document of values, a blueprint for how he believed actors should behave when the cameras weren't rolling. And the irony? Even the actors who made the list admired Newman. Redford famously laughed when he learned he was #1 and said, "I'm honored I irritated him that much. That means I mattered." In the end, the list didn't expose Newman's anger. It exposed his integrity. The final takeaway isn't who he disliked, but what he stood for. Paul Newman's private list wasn't meant to be dramatic, scandalous, or cruel. It was honest. That was the difference. Behind the charm, the calm voice, and the effortless coolness was a man who held himself to a standard most people never saw. And he expected others to do the same. When he felt someone wasted their influence, their talent, or the responsibility that came with being a public figure, he didn't lash out. He simply remembered. What makes the list fascinating is that it reveals the real Newman, not the polished Hollywood version. The man who believed professionalism mattered more than fame, who valued preparation over ego, and who never forgot that audiences deserved sincerity. Each name on that list tells a story, but together they paint a portrait of an actor who understood his craft at a deeper level than most. And now, years after his death, the list offers something rare. A glimpse behind the curtain of a figure people thought they knew completely. It reminds us that even the most admired, charitable, easygoing individuals have their limits. They have boundaries. They have private truths that don't match the public narrative. So as we look back on Newman's career, the takeaway isn't the conflicts he kept to himself. It's the principles he lived by. His quiet insistence that talent carries responsibility, his refusal to accept laziness, arrogance, or indifference, and his belief that integrity should matter as much off the screen as it does on it. If you enjoyed this look into the side of Paul Newman the public never saw, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more untold stories from Hollywood's greatest era. And let us know in the comments, which name on Newman's list surprised you the most? Even legends have their breaking points. Paul Newman just kept his hidden until the very end.